With no further transition, I will invite on stage my panelists for this morning. Karine Lebois-Saison, who's the Chief Impact Officer for EDF. Albert Chung, who's the Deputy CEO for Bloomberg New Energy Finance. June Dumollard, sorry, who's CFO at Unédic. Frédéric Jaubert, who's the secrétaire général adjoint at the Secretariat Général à la planification écologique, the Ecology Plan for France, and Mohamed Kalala, who's our global head of CIB at Natixis. Thank you. So with no further transition, you've seen how we've named this session. From green hype to green hushing, how to keep pace and avoid backtracking in a real economy. And I think this is what we want to be really looking at. As Stephanie mentioned, 2 years ago, we opened our Green Summit, ascertaining that the transition was erratic, too slow, bumpy, and desynchronized. Probably still true. But what we, I think, have very well understood, or at least witnessed, is the dilemma between acceleration and protection. And that dilemma has proven very acute, while global emissions are upward, energy and geopolitical shocks have been extremely impactful in increasing the disorder in the transition. What we also have witnessed is, despite a number of conflicting forces, creating upheaval, green hushing, as we'll be discussing, and challenges with pace and resource allocation, we are seeing many actors in real life translating their objective into concrete investment plans and organizational change, and I want us also to be able to look at this. So let's focus on what we've called the tectonic of transition. How can we increase pace, accelerate the effort in a dissonant environment, because we are living in an extremely dissonant environment, and I think Gaspard made it very clear as well. And what's the role of transforming our narratives? I will start with you, Albert. If you could help us in your capacity at BNF, stock taking a bit. How do you qualify and comment the disordered nature of the transition underway, yet happening, but full of dissonance? Green hype to green hushing, dissonance between opinion polls and actual individual actions, the geographical dissonances. So if you could just give us a bit of an overview of where we stand.
Thank you very much, Orid, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's really a pleasure to share the stage with such a distinguished panel. The word dissonance really resonates with me, and I've been thinking for the last few years that to work in the energy transition, in the green transition, is to live in a state of cognitive dissonance. And I'll explain why. So at BNF, we always come with data, so just a few numbers, some fundamentals. So last year, we tracked $1.8 trillion of new investment into clean energy technologies deployment globally. So that's things like renewables, electric vehicles, nuclear technologies, power grids, et cetera, hydrogen. So $1.8 trillion, and that's growing very rapidly, actually. So that number has doubled since 2020. It's never been bigger. And we're seeing record deployments of renewable energy. We think about 600 gigawatts of new renewables will be added to the global grid this year. Again, that's double the levels from a couple of years ago. Electric vehicle sales will be at record levels this year globally, 20% above the year before. And so in many ways, things have never been moving faster in the transition. Things have never been, let's say, better in some ways. But there is dissonance. So the dissonance, for me at least, comes from several different places. One is we know it's not nearly enough. So even though everything's going faster, record levels, et cetera, we need to go even faster. And by our reckoning, that $1.8 trillion is only 1/3 of what's required each year for the rest of this decade to get on track for net zero by 2050. So we need to be going 3x faster, so that's dissonance number one. For me, dissonance number two is there are just a lot of myths out there. And every day we hear about electric vehicles are dirtier than internal combustion engine vehicles. It's not true. Renewable energy is too expensive, more expensive than fossil. It's not true. So there's all this stuff that's not true that goes out there. And then I think partly related to that then is this increasing politicization of the transition. And we see this around the world. We see it particularly in the US. And I don't know if we're going to talk about the election, but certainly in the last couple of years, what we've seen in the US is this green hushing trend towards kind of pushing back against environmental and social factors, pushing back against the green narratives, and the deliberate politicization of these topics, which I think, again, creates dissonance for many people. I also think there are some things that have not been done well, and we should own up to that. I think we should own up to the fact that there has been greenwashing. There have been elements of, let's say, for example, the voluntary carbon markets, where some projects have lacked credibility and integrity. There are some regulations that have created more red tape and more pain than they should have done. So I think those are real concerns. And then the final dissonance, again, from my perspective, is this geopolitical one, which you mentioned. And I think a lot of the success of the transition, at least the clean energy transition, where I'm most focused, has been predicated on rapid cost reductions in technologies that have mainly been manufactured in mainland China. And countries outside of mainland China are now reckoning with this choice of whether to continue in that path or whether not to. And those are difficult choices. So maybe just to conclude my remarks, I do think we're going faster. We're going. Things are in some ways better than ever before, and I think this continues to be the most consequential economic opportunity of our generation. And I do think I think most people believe in climate change. They believe it's us. They believe we can solve it. But we have to reckon with the real challenges, and I think that's where this, hopefully this group can help move the needle.
Thank you very much, Albert. Frédéric, maybe. As ecological planning, one could reckon that your role is to try and bring order to the transition. And the challenge is, how do we get from planning to actual delivery, which is one of the thematics of our day, for sure. And what are the key challenges you're encountering? And especially, what are, to your opinion, the key factors that would make these transformations socially acceptable? And I would underline the end, desirable.
Thank you very much for having me here. And it's a good and long question, so I try to answer in a structured way. To your first point, bringing order, I think, as you said, thank you. Everything is in a try, because it certainly doesn't very much look like it. But yes, that's the point of creating this new structure directly attached to the Prime Minister. What we're trying to do is overcome those historical and long and fruitless debates between ministries that each follow their own agenda, being believed that the transition agenda is superseding all of those. The way we do it is by trying to foster, not alone, right, but with all the administrations, sort of cultural changes with two facts. One is bringing the culture of facts and rigor into politics. So we're not here to foster militantism. We're not here to push one agenda over another, which is here to tell the truth about what are the objectives, what is the path we're trying to follow, what are the physical limits we must respect, what are the economical realities we have to account for, what is the reality on biodiversity collapse and climate change, etc. So just coming back to just true facts, and this is where we should be, this is where we are. And the second cultural change is the culture of progress and results. So it's not enough to announce a plan. What really is enough, or should be enough, or should be close to enough, is to actually deliver the plan. So we're trying to set together a method by which we monitor the progress, the results, and tracking whether it's linked or not to our policies. And the results of that is sometimes eye-opening and sometimes a bit I mean, create anxiety, to come back to what Gaspar said, but that should not stop us. To your second point of the question, why is it so hard? Well, there are so many reasons why, but I would come with only two. The first one, admittedly, is the sheer complexity and richness and depth of our regulatory frameworks, administrations, rules, processes, committees, governance layers, at national and European layers, subnational levels, etc. Some say, and to be fair, it's partly true that it's slowing us down, it costs a lot of money, it's slowing us efficiency, and we can really see us as planning how we could do so much more with the resources that we have. Having said that, people say, so why don't you do anything about it? It's a good question. The truth is that behind each of those layers and rules and laws and process, there is not one bureaucrat, that woke up one morning and says, I'm going to do this. There's always a good reason why we do it. And these good reasons often, most of the time, has been pushed forward by the public, by the civil society, by the corporate world, by the parliament, sometimes by the government, obviously. But it's a real collective responsibility of all of us to actually trying to bring down bring this simplification agenda. And it's a bit what Gaspar said, right? We need one vision, one simple objective, and then let people work around this objective. The second reason why it's so hard, and that's kind of what your questions implied as well, right? We failed on building a desirable narrative. The farming example that Gaspar come across is actually a very illustrative one. During the protests at the beginning of the year, and I finished on that one, there has been installed in the public debate that the reason why the farmers were having so many difficulties was because of the ecological transition. It's because of those norms, it's because of agroecology, that they don't have the right wealth, that their yields are decreasing, etc. It's, truthfully, completely absurd, or it is largely absurd. And yet, it was in the collective debate and largely popular, meaning that generally there is a majority of people, I think if you ask it, believing that was true. And that's something that in our democracy is fundamentally, essentially, substantially very hard to fight, right? So that means, and that comes to greenwashing, that we need to put together our environmental agenda by pushing forward first the co-benefits. It's about sovereignty. It's about reindustrialization. It's about poverty. It's about social benefits. It's about health benefits. And that's because if you put forward the ecological agenda, there will be this backlash. And that's the good news, that there is a lot of co-benefits, so we can do this, but it's blurring the vision. And it's also slowing us down, I believe.
Thank you very much. I'll turn now to Mohamed. We've mentioned the hushing phenomenon. In your experience at Natixis, is it? Have you observed it? Do you think it's impacting the drive of our transition? And I'd say more importantly, on a wider note, what's the role of the financial system in this transition? It's been a bit of a philosophical debate we've had for quite some time. Is it to enable? Is it to facilitate? Is it to enhance? And more, or if I put it in another metaphorical way, are we a thermostat? Are we a heating system, or are we a cooling system? What's your opinion?
Thank you for having me today. Actually, you have many questions in one, so it's just illustrating the complexity of the debate. Let's start with the first one, hashing. Honestly, personally, I don't think that we are slowing. I think that we are running ahead of what we decided to do together more than 10 years ago. But we are more careful when it comes to saying what we do, saying what we're gonna do in the future. Even if what you look at our balance sheet, I'm talking about Natixis CAB, of course. I'm not talking about retail. I'm talking about the CAB. Even if when you look at the balance sheet, we are ahead of the curve of what we decided to do 10 years ago. The greenwashing is really making our lawyers richer. And when you want to say something, even internally, so you need first to have a way to measure what you're announcing and be sure that your measurement is something that anyone can check. It's even better if it's measured by someone else. So then before even beginning to say something, you need to have a process. So even we're still deeply involved in mitigating the climate change. We are more careful when it comes to communication. So this is the first topic. But I don't think that we're slowing. And we are not slowing not because we want to do more ESG. Of course, we decided to do this 10 years ago, but because it makes sense for a for-profit organization. We are a bank. The bank is financing the real economy. Having said that, of course, a bank in the Middle East, in the US, or in Europe will not behave in the same way. Let's talk about the best-in-class ESG-wise. I'm going to say European bank. We have an economy, we have people, we have sovereignty, it has been mentioned. So our balance sheet is just mirroring this. Our balance sheet cannot be better ESG-wise than what our clients are doing, even in France. In France, maybe it's the best in class in Europe as a country in ESG, but the balance sheet of the French banks cannot be better than the actors in France. This is not possible. But if you say, I'm gonna exit many clients, that's what we decided to do. We decided to finance the best in class in each sector, of course, avoiding certain sectors like coal and other sectors like this. But even saying this, you cannot be totally separated from what your economy is doing. So again, I'm gonna share with you something that happened in June when we released our strategic plan. I did a rehearsal with some members of our board before the final presentation, and one of the board members of Natixis told me, Mohammed, ESG is no longer a key strategic pillar in your strategic plan. So I was, of course, surprised. I said, okay, look at the slide. There is not a single slide without 2-3 times mentioning ESG, climate hedging, electricity. I said, it's in everything. So we're not saying, as we used to say 10 years ago, that we need to develop ESG. We're saying that in all sectors, in all products, we're talking about ESG. It's a way to move to the next part of your question. What should be the role of banks? I'm talking about what we are trying to do. We have 100 billion balance sheet. We have 100 billion financing to the economy, which is something like 0.2% of the global balance sheet available for the economy, which is nothing actually. It's important, 100 billion, but it's not that important for the economy. So, but what we decided to do is to be an enabler. What does it mean? It means that we are trying to help the actors that are profitable. Again, we are a for-profitable institution. The actors with a very clear business model, profitable business model, skilled people, to make their dream reality, to help them financing their projects. It's not a matter only of providing cash. It's not just providing 100 million or a billion or 10 billions. It's also the key element to help those guys is to reduce the risk of their project. Reducing the risk means that you need first to understand the business model and say, okay, you're gonna sell your green electricity in 10 years' time. I'm gonna make my best to give you a minimum price for this electricity. So I'm gonna hedge this one. Of course, you can have a PPA, but you can hedge it in the market. Having said that, you mean that, okay, if you have a hedged price of electricity, then it's gonna be easier to finance you through a bank or through a issue on the bond market. Okay, but if we want to hedge the price of the electricity, I need to hedge the price of the copper. I need to hedge the price of all critical metals. I need to help you buying the batteries to balance between the effect of intermittent of renewable energy. But you don't have enough financial means to do this. You don't have the skilled people. So I need to find a JV between you and someone who is really skilled in battery. Because in battery world, you need to be global. The size is really critical key of success. So this is the role of banks. It's not only we're going to continue to finance, obviously, but the role of banks is not only financing, it's also helping the actor to create a profitable, well understood by the investor community, vehicles and companies. This is our role. Now, what's the role of other financial institutions? Actually, you have asset management, investor, and insurance company. These are the three populations in the financial world. I like to say that insurance and banks are more or less the same when it comes to ESG, with the insurance company having an advantage compared to bank. They have the liquidity within the insurance business is an embedded scarce resources. We at the bank, when we give a 100 million loan, we have only 5 million equity. We have 95 million liquidity coming from investor in our own bonds. So we are really, in a way, dependent from our investor. In the insurance business, the liquidity is embedded in the business model. So insurance also are for-profit organization, and they need to tackle and to take care about all the topics that I mentioned for the bank. The key players, the key decision makers within the financial world are the investor. The investor through asset manager, or the investor in the bond of the bank, or the investor in life insurance of the insurance company. They are the key decision maker, because in the same day they're going to talk to you saying, I want you to have 25, 30%, 40% ESG investment, but at the end of the day, they're going to ask you to have a return on equity of 15. And of course, you're going to tell them yes, but there's only a few businesses that are today able to deliver 15% return on equity in the kind of investment you would like to invest in. And then the ESG becomes less critical. So we still, I think that the decision makers are the investor. And the decision makers on top of the investor at the end of the chain is the consumers. Because if we all decide not to use fossil fuel, I think that the electric car will by far go beyond 10% or 8%, which is the case in Europe today. The banks are mirroring your behavior, the way you are behaving. This is, this is what we're saying. And honestly, we're doing our best to be the best, to be as active as possible within the ESG world, but your behavior is the framework where we can play in. So we cannot go beyond the behavior of people in its jurisdiction. So this is key for me, and this is the message. There is no hushing. I think that we are doing better than we anticipated, and we're going to accelerate because it's becoming a profitable world for the banks. Now it's profitable. It wasn't profitable in the last 10 years, but now it's becoming profitable. So I think the industry will accelerate on that. I'm keeping aside US. We don't know what's going to happen there. But in Europe and even in Asia, it's a profitable business to be involved in ESG now.
Thank you, Mohamed. And I think the call for individual, remembering the individual, I would say, power on the whole transition is a perfect transition to you.
I just want to say one word.
Sure.
From what said Gaspard, I'm going to make sure that we will never finance macaque any longer, especially if they are skilled in AI. This is for sure we won't do. We stopped doing this actually a few years ago.
June, perfect transition. I wanted to get you to share with us from where you stand, whether you would agree that the last few years have taught us that what we actually need is a social contract for transition, rebalancing responsibilities, calling for genuine support and protection. And from where you stand at UNEDIC, for those of you maybe outside France who don't know, UNEDIC is the unemployment system in France. And June and us have been working together for a very long time on these matters. How has climate transition has been impacting and causing or provoking job transformation? And how public and private sectors should be facilitating those job transformation?
Thanks for having me. It's indeed first for us to start out and speak about green subject, akin and relating to employment and social. You've said it, Mohamed spoke about profitable insurance. We are a non-profit insurance, and we're so good at protecting people that we are currently accumulated 60 billion debt, and we are going to try and do better without spending as much. But recent years have been tremendous in the trend and how global events, especially the sanitary ones in recent times, can have a huge impact on society and, as a consequence, on our models. One of the questions about greenwashing is a good one, and I will start with what happened inside our own company. Orit and some bizarre other green bankers have been hushing us for many years about the green subject. But we've tried to, speak to the political leaders. We've tried to say, okay, we have some figures, there are scientific reports, we can study them, etc. But we had no mandate or no mission coming from the top down saying, okay, you need to work on this. It all started around 2 years ago in an innovative lab consisting of a few employees, which I have to credit about the approach and how it started. So regardless of their position inside the company, their age, specialty, we gathered together and tried to say, okay, we have now to get to the politics in a different way, and we're going to take all scientific report, but just focus on employment and try to see what are all those, knowledgeable scientists say about the future of employment regarding green transition. And sometimes when you hear skeptical people, they will say there's no scientific consensus. And it's all the more true for social subjects and social themes. But there is a consensus about green transition and employment. Globally, it's not going to change dramatically the number of people working. And it's a good news. I mean, we would prefer some of the most optimistic who say that in France it should yield 2 million new job creation, but some others say it's going to destroy 1 million. When you take all the reports, it's really marginal. If I take another example for Europe, some say the consensus should be around 500,000 job creation in 30 years. The global economy is going to create 7 million jobs in Europe. So macroeconomics is always going to be the main driver for us. And we do not think that green transition itself is going to either create or destroy a lot of jobs. However, what we found as a consensus is that many jobs are going to change. And this is already happening, so whether the stakeholders, the political leaders, or the firm owners want to take the subject at hand and tackle it concretely, it is already happening. And the car industry is a good example. You still have the same number of people working inside the car industry, but they are not making the same cars at all. Who would have thought, like 10 years ago, that most of the biggest companies would be building not thermal engines, but electrical engine, requiring, of course, very different skills. We're still extracting the same energy source, but what we're using and how we're using it is very different. And today, transportation equates to about 30% of carbon emission. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with those numbers. But putting those numbers at hand is a good example, and we already have schemes that are co-financed by us, by the state, and by car makers so that we can adapt the jobs of the people that are working inside the plants so that it can make different engine, different cars compared to before. So this is already happening. Some figures, so hopefully some of you can have an impact on those policies and those changes. 75% of French people in a survey say, I mean the survey conducted recently, say that they have already changed their day-to-day behavior to adapt to the situation, to the transition. 75% of the French workers say that the global transition will have a significant impact on their day-to-day jobs. 80% of firm owners think that the global change will not or only have a marginal impact on their business model. So this is very much, I don't want to point hands to anyone, but when you have someone, usually more senior, thinking in a way, and you have its close relationship, people working in his stuff, very close to it, thinking completely otherwise, I think you need to tackle the subject. It's like your, old parents or elderly uncle saying something that is really, really different than what you think. So today, things are happening, and it's started inside the firms at the employees level. And when you look at company sizes, of course, the smaller the company, the more common those ideas are, and the bigger the company, the bigger the distance on those subjects are between the leaders and the staff. And last but not least, and that's a call to action, and not a hushing, but the worst one in the industry, thinking about how this will affect the business model, is the finance industry. So only 20% of finance industry leaders, insurers, think that transition will affect the business model. And this is by far the worst one, if you take all the sectors. However, it's interesting, over more than half that the finance industry leaders think that the green transition is an opportunity for more business. So I won't act and call for action on the moral or some ethical idea, but please do business on the green transition. It's important.
Thank you, Jun. Last but not least, Karine. I wanted to finish off a bit our discussion. You've heard me saying, I think, 3 times already, the notion of narratives, which I believe is a very key notion. And what we've observed around the rebirth of nuclear, if you allow me to call it that way, even in Japan over the last 4 or 5 years, I think is extremely telling, and also of the complexity, the multidimensional, and it's the factors that are at play. So, and also the conflicting objectives. So I think what we've heard from everybody is a rhetorics around dissonances, which is kind of finding some sort of musicality that is driving some movement. So can you, Karine, help us look into what's your perspective on what we've witnessed on the nuclear industry, how to manage over all of these conflicting objectives that are evolving, some contradictory injunction, if I allow myself to call them that way, when you deal with investments that in your industry are necessarily super long term.
So Gaspard would be sad to know that we've never seen as many analyst reports talking about nuclear because of AI. So, but joking apart, in most countries where we operate, there is no so much uncertainty or divergence around the direction of travel for our sector. There's a general consensus about the fact that we need to electrify to get rid of the fossil fuel. Of course, it doesn't mean we're on track. We're not on track, far from it. Just for France, we have identified 150 terawatt-hour of electricity needed between now and 2035 if we want to reach the net zero by 2050. So that shows, and I think it was pretty common as well when you talk about the narrative, is that it's not because we know that we act. Unfortunately, we are not looking for truth. We are full of our own beliefs, our own values, our political views as well. But there are some diverging views around two how. The first how is what degree of energy efficiency, sufficiency, sobriété, as we say in French, and for the new builds, which technology, and the role of hydrogen, for example. The second divergence is how fast. For the electricity sector, you have places where it has to be net zero by 2035, 2040, 2050. And what does it mean for the rest of the economy? Of course, there is no one silver bullet point solution. It depends on your energy mix to start with. It depends on your political, your cultural, your social view. I'm sure that the view on coal in Poland is not the same as nuclear in France. It's pretty obvious. But all solutions will probably have to tackle two challenges. The first one is affordability. There is a growing pressure everywhere on minimizing cost for the system. And the harsh reality is that we have lost a lot of time in France and in Europe debating the wrong question. Should we have more or less nuclear or more or less renewable in the electricity mix? Instead of focusing on get rid of the fossil in transport, in buildings, in industry. Which means that by not taking a decision, we took a decision, which was to delay. So today we are facing, in France alone in our sector for the next 10 to 15 years, an investment wall which is massive. 100 billion in generation, 100 billion in distribution, 100 billion in transport. And here comes the affordability issue. The second challenge is reliability. We need to build an energy system which can power an entire economy and that will be resilient to a less stable environment. In that context, we cannot afford not to use one of the proven low-carbon technology which produces 24/7. And guess what? The Amazon and the Microsoft of this world got it very right for their data centers, and here comes the nuclear rebirth, right? Because they need 24/7 low-carbon technology. So what does it mean for EDF? First, you need a balanced power mix, which has both dispatchable and renewable source of energy, because otherwise you cannot face the reliability issue. Of course, all of this is making sure you can crack the nut of climate change adaptation, which is really, really, really hard. The second is the whole system cost. EDF being involved throughout the whole value chain from production, distribution and supply means that we are not just about installing gigawatts in the system for the sake of it and let the system deal with it. There has been almost 8,000 hours of negative prices in Europe in the first 6 months of the year. Everybody lose, right? Everybody lose. So we have to make sure that we think about the system. So what is our singularity? And I think this is really what it comes to when you have to take the long-term decision. Our singularity is that we are the largest producer of electricity in the world without direct CO2 emissions. So we have to keep on doing that. So extending the life of our assets, building new capacity, of course, but first is sufficiency. We need to make sure we can do with less. And we need to think about the system, as I said, so we need flexibility, storage, we need to make sure we have demand-side management, and we need to help our clients to decarbonize. But again, think about the system, so collective and not individual in a way, so that we can really tackle the two challenges of affordability and reliability.
Thank you, Karine. In the help our clients consume less, I think we're back to our way of rendering that transition feasible and desirable. Maybe one last question for you, Frédéric. And sorry, you are a representative of the political arena on this panel. One of the dissonances that we have mentioned today is around the dissonance between, and that's a very European-centric comment I'm going to make. The European Union-led strong, I would say, sustainability and climate regulatory frameworks that are targeting pretty much all parties, all stakeholders, and the current political environment that we will at length discuss during one of our sessions today, where climate and environmental agenda admittedly has been a bit downgraded over the last year or so. And it's not a French-specific comment, it's obviously a global comment. But what's your observation, understanding of that very obvious dissonance?
Story of my life. Interestingly, I mean, you're entirely right. There is this, I would say, gap, right? We got to go through it, and that's another of my cognitive dissonance. I try to remain strongly optimistic, and I believe that these are, in fact, two different levels. You can choose to be right-wing, to be left-wing. You can choose to be a traditionalist, to be a liberal, to be a neo-Marxist. You can choose all of that. It's all very well respectable. You can't choose whether or not climate change is happening. You can't choose whether biodiversity collapse is a thing. You can't choose whether or not to protect our cities against the exposure of rainfalls and storms. Those are just facts, and they're there. And this is why we're repeating all over and over again. That means that the debate should be one layer down. And are you a market believer? Do you want more state-led policies? Do you want to tax the rich so that the poor cannot transition? Do you want to force the wealthy to transition first to protect the poor? There are different paths. What matters is to get it done. And that's the essence of our job, essentially, right? What we do in our Secretariat Général is to always remind this is where we should be. We should have put together that many gigawatts of renewables. We should have improved our networks by that much. We should have renovated our houses by that much. You can argue whether or not we don't have enough money to fund these sort of subsidies, and that's fine. But that means you need to come up with another framework, with another policy, with another way to actually make it happen. And both are defendables, both are actually refutables, but what you can't discuss is this transition policy that is the challenge of our generation, and this is a fact. That, in a way, helps us keeping our skeleton on, when our spine together. It's not easy every day, but there is no other way, I believe.
Thank you very much. With the challenge of being almost on time, I think what we've tackled this morning are many topics, and they are a very good reflection of what we're going to start discussing with all of you today, whether on the job side, on the energy, on the affordability, on the social consequences of transition, or on through the artistic dimension of the day, the narratives. I think those are very key words in front of, for us, all of us. And that very well showed the multi-dimensional nature of the challenges that we are trying to tackle. Thank you very much for your attention. Starting now, you're going to split all over the place. It's a bit challenging because there are many different areas in the venue, so there are plenty of people to help you navigate the space. You have a small 10 minutes to reach your next session. And we will reconvene here at the end of the day, and of course for lunch. Thanks very much.